I reviewed Soul Blazer a few months ago, so I figured it was about time to play the next game in the Enix trilogy, named Illusion of Gaia. Other than still containing the overhead action RPG feel and a few reused sound effects, there's really no correlation between the two games. The basic impression with the game is that it looks a bit similar in gameplay to Soul Blazer, but with less freeing of souls and more action and puzzles. The game takes turns between talking with NPCs to learn more of the story and dungeons that require a lot of reflex and thought to complete. You start the game as a young boy named Will, who was orphaned when his father took Will to the Tower of Babel and suddenly disappeared. Since then, Will was raised by his grandparents, but Will has telekinetic powers. His friends force him to show him this ability by moving a statue without touching it. With this basic ability, you'll be solving a lot of puzzles though. To continue on with the story, Will eventually embarks on a journey with his friends to travel the world and obtain 6 mystic statues. These mystic statues are needed to stop a dangerous comet from striking the planet. That's right, the real threat of an RPG is a comet. Supposedly, this comet was enhanced biologically, and as it gets closer it mutates more and more creatures. Will is tasked by an ancient clan of spirits to cross the world and destroy it. Of course, this is no easy task. By traveling the world, I'm not kidding. You start in a town called South Cape, where Will finishes school and hangs out with his friends, who then talk about his abilities. After this, Will travels to places such as the Edward Castle Dungeon, where the game really starts. Here, you'll learn about combat and gameplay. It starts off simple enough, and for the most part, the game is fairly easy, but once you get to a later temple, it starts getting brutally difficult. The enemies do a ton of damage, and it won't take many hits before you die in that area. Before I get too into it, I'll jump into the combat. It's sort of similar to Soul Blazer, as you can only attack in the 4 cardinal directions. However, there's a massive improvement in which you can finally walk in diagonals. You can also run around, so traveling is much smoother in this game than its predecessor. One of the more interesting things about the combat, though, is that Will's weapon is a flute. Yep. This has got to be the most durable flute in the world. Plus, Will plays it at times. That's gotta be a bit disgusting. Will puts a flute to his mouth complete with monster guts. Yummy. Anyway, the game plays like any other overhead action RPG. You slash and attack enemies until they die. When you clear an entire room, you get one of 3 power-ups. Will's attack, defense, or health increases by a point. Because of this, there's no real equipment you'll be using, but instead it'll focus strictly on item pickups. Another thing that you'll see during the fighting is the spheres that the enemies drop when they die. These are called dark energy, and consider them the same things as coins in the Mario games. If you collect 100 of them, you gain an extra chance so that if you die, you just start at the beginning of the area. If you die without any of these extra lives, you go back to the last time you saved. These spheres can be grabbed at a distance with Will's telekinetic skills. Just keep in mind that you cannot gain more than 9 lives, so if you grab more dark energy, you won't get any extra lives. The other downside is that you don't revive with full health, which was really only an issue in 1 or 2 instances. As for healing up, there's really 3 ways to do it. First, when you return to town, your life is filled. Second, if you get to a save point, your life is filled. Finally, on rare occasion, enemies will drop an orb with a heart included in it. This only gets you 5 extra life points, but these can also save you if you're cautious enough. And now that I think of it, there is a 4th way. If you get a health power up when you clear an area, you also get your life refilled. So, yeah, it's not 3 ways, it's 4. Let's move back to the story again. It's done so in an interesting way, as the game really can't figure out if they want to tell it in first or third person. There will be times when the game swaps between the narrator and Will himself. For example, there might be a time where the game says Will left to move to this area. Later on you might see, I saw something in that window. It's a bit confusing at times, and to make it worse, it's way too easy to move through the conversation. In most games, A is used to proceed when a window pops up, but in Illusion of Gaia, the game also allows you to use the frickin' control pad to close windows. This isn't too bad if you anticipate a window popping up, but if you attempt to run at the wrong time, that second tap of the directional pad might close a window that pops up when you hit a hot spot. So when there's a vital piece of dialogue or narration appearing, if you don't know what's going to appear, you might accidentally close it and not know what it was supposed to say. Another issue with the game is the inconsistent timing of it. For the most part, the game is very fast-paced and frantic, but when you're lost and don't know where to go, it can slow down to a crawl. Enemies don't respawn, so if you're missing something simple, you might just be running around. I'm ashamed to admit it, but there were a few times where I had to look at an FAQ to figure out where to run to next. I will also admit that when I read the solutions, I facepalmed. Often it's just small, easy to see details I just missed. The timing doesn't just deal with the combat scenes though. The text is usually scrolled at a decent speed, but when you get an important item, the game will tell you in an excruciatingly miserably slow speed. You can't skip this forward or speed it up in any way. Another thing is that traveling on the world map is just as slow. When you need to travel from place to place, you enter the world map. Most of the time, you're restricted to which area you can go to next. Most areas cannot be backtracked to once you get to a certain point in the story. But that's not the problem. It's the actual traveling animation. Just like some of the important text, it's just so slow. It breaks the fast motion of the game. It wouldn't be so bad, but the map always has to rotate to being at the right side before it allows you to enter the stage. It's an unnecessary feature. It should be that the party moves from point A to point B, the camera zooms in, and you're introduced to the next level. Also, how many times do you really need to be reminded what ATK and DEF mean? According to the game, every time you see it, it feels you forget what they are. When you get a stat upgrade, the game will always tell you that DEF, defense, has increased. What's the point of putting both in each time? I get the first time that explains it to you, but for fuck's sake, if the game feels that it should remind you each time, just skip the DEF and spell defense every frickin' time. We'll go back to the story one more time. The story isn't the most inventive, but it's fairly unique with the deadly comet approaching Earth. The problem though is that the game tells you early on that you need to find the Mystic statues, but not why. As you continue on in the game, it seems to forget about the story and just feeds you along minor plot lines to give you reason to change areas of the game. There's even a section about vampires, with little reason why. The game just seems to forget about the main story until the very end, where you're suddenly reminded about the comet and that you need to destroy it. But by then, who gives a shit? You just want to finish the game because you played it for a while. The final boss is some sort of creature on the comet, and once you get the pattern down, it's seriously a giant disappointment to the end of the game. The ending really isn't noteworthy, as Will and Kara, the princess of Edward Castle who falls in love with Will, part ways, only to be reunited in a futuristic school. Apparently when the comet is destroyed, technology advances to modern levels instantly. What the hell? Was the comet's power preventing intelligence? I don't understand it. You may have noticed other characters fighting monsters other than Will, so let me explain. We'll get some help from the Dark Knight and Ultimate Warrior. No, it's not Batman or WWF's Ultimate Warrior, but instead Frieden and Shadow. Frieden is a powerful hulking knight that does about double damage than Will. He also gets an overpowered ranged attack that destroys anything in his path. Shadow, on the other hand, feels underpowered for being a supposed Ultimate Warrior. First, you get him real late in the game, so you'd expect him to be great. However, the only real ability he gets is a longer melee range and the ability to turn into a puddle of water to pass through the ground to other areas. The only other time he's useful is the final battle, and that's only because he gains the Phoenix magic first found in Soul Blazer, and also because you're forced to use him. It's a bit disappointing when you finally get to use Shadow, so when possible, I'd recommend sticking with Frieden or even Will. I guess this should come as no surprise, but you never get any backstory on why Frieden and Shadow really joined your party. Shadow is at least given some sort of reason, as he's actually just a small part of the comet that decides to fight against it for some reason. Frieden, on the other hand, is just given you as a playable character with no backstory whatsoever, other than just calling him a Dark Knight. Yeah, he's powerful, but in an RPG, the story should really take the front part of the stage, with gameplay picking a great backer, not the other way around. The only other thing left to mention is the graphics and sound, which I may as well go on about now. Both of them are equally as good. The sound effects are occasionally reused from Soul Blazer, but otherwise the music is original and for the most part epic and moody. The graphics help reiterate the feel with bright, colorful sprites and environments. One of my favorite areas is the Angel Cave, which has a dark, gloomy feel, but at the same time features waterfalls and light beams from the ceiling. Overall, it's a very slick looking game. Illusion of Gaia is a great game when it comes to the gameplay, but the story is best forgotten. It's really a shame, since an RPG should focus mostly on a story. But this one doesn't do it. At least the controls are smooth enough so it's a fun game. It's also pretty lengthy too, clocking at probably close to about 20 hours or so. There's also a hidden dungeon available if you can manage to find all 50 red jewels, but I wasn't able to do so. This can probably help you give it another 30 to 60 minutes though. Overall, it's definitely a fun little game, but the third game in the series is definitely the best. However, Terranigma is a different game, and therefore, a different review. Final score? 8 out of 10. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.